So we're not quite sure what we're doing here.
Yes.
Okay.
No, we
Okay.
were just deciding which podcast do we want to do. Hi, and welcome to the Police Society for Problem-Based Learning podcast. My name is Malena Gonzalez, Vice President for the Society, and I have gathered with me for this podcast different board members to discuss themes, training, and learning methodologies to encourage the police to become an equal partner with the community and help be the change the community needs. As board members, we understand the lack of police reform and how all teaching methodologies get in the way of a police reform. We are missing great opportunities on how we can forge the new role of the police in these changing times. With a great panel of experts within our board, we will bring you new conversations for you to discover, and you can visit us at pspbl.org to learn further, or check our upcoming free webinars to learn further about the PTO or PBL certification. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, and you can send us your questions to info@pspbl.org. On today's episode, we have in our podcast a couple of our board members that I'm gonna ask them to introduce themselves. Paul, can you start?
Sure, I might as well start. My name is Paul LaFeria. I am the president of the PSPBL and a retired captain with the Lowell, Massachusetts Police Department. How about Roger?
Hi, my name is Roger Bulis. I am a past president of the Police Society for Problem-Based Learning. I'm the current treasurer for the organization. I am retired from the city of Richmond in California, where I was a police officer, and I retired as a police sergeant, where I had a number of different assignments. And in retirement, I've gone back to grad school and earned a graduate degree, and worked for a short period of time for Lexipol, the policy development and training company. So, Greg.
Good evening or good morning, wherever you are. My name is Greg Saville. I'm a criminologist by training. I'm also a former police officer from the Toronto region in Canada. I've been doing research as a consultant and as a trainer and for about 30 years. And I'm one of the people who were involved with the formation of the Police Society for Problem-Based Learning some 15 years ago, I guess it was. So that's me. Janelle, over to you.
Hello, I'm Janelle Hebert. I work for the Council on Law Enforcement Education and Training in Oklahoma. I am an instructor and a learning management system coordinator.
Well, thank you, everyone. And to start this first podcast, we're gonna actually start talking about the use of force. So one of the first questions that we got submitted was, how does problem-based learning and emotional intelligence changes the training in police officers with respect to the use of force? Can anyone answer a question based on your point of view as a sergeant or as a trainer or as a consultant?
I'll get started. So I can tell you as a criminologist, this has been a field of study for many, many years. The use of force in policing has been a study for many, many years. And police researchers and police policy people and decision makers have been trying to deal with this excessive use of force in policing. Why does it happen? How does it start? How do we train better and so forth? And we've got all kinds of solutions on the plate. Things from implicit bias training, which turns out not to work that well, to different kinds of use of force training, and so forth. And I can tell you that my personal belief, having been a police officer and been a trainer and worked in the field, is a lot of the seeds for police behavior are sown in the earliest days of the officer's career in the academy and in the field training, what we call police training. That's where the seeds are sown. So if the attitudes, the approaches, if there's a lack of critical thinking, if there's a lack of problem solving, if there's a us versus them, any of those kinds of strategies, any of those attitudes, that's where the problems begin. And by the time you get on the road 3, 4, or 5 years down the road, when crisis happens and emotions boil over, And I'll let my other panelists speak to how PBL deals with those issues. By the time you get to that down the road, if the seeds have already been planted, you're not going to train that out of the officers. It's too late. So I'll start it off with that comment.
Very interesting point of view that it has to be since the beginning, where we need to start planting that better seed. Does anyone else would like to add something else in regards to this?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about it from the position of a sergeant, because I think that the sergeant's position is one of the, well, besides the field trainer, I think the sergeant has the most influence on our officers and on our cultures in our police departments. And so I think when we're talking about use of force, I think we have to think about things like de-escalation training, conflict management training, conflict resolution training, communication. And those things are in your hands as a sergeant. You can do those kinds of lineup trainings and one-on-one coaching things to talk to your direct reports, to check on them, to make sure that they're doing the right things. And I think that that's critical, but not only what should be trained, how it should be trained is also important, which is the problem-based learning aspect of it. We got to get away from the PowerPoint and lecture stuff, or casual conversations are nice, but sometimes they don't stick. Rather, I prefer learning in the context of how we learn on the street, which is like scenarios and problem solving. So that's why I like the what if game. What if this happens? There's all kinds of opportunities, suggestions, things to spark a conversation on the internet now with all the body cam video. We learn from our mistakes, but we're really smart when we learn from the mistakes of other people. So by not repeating the mistakes that other people have made or that you've seen on body cam videos, we do ourselves a better service. So we have to learn to be creative about the training, and we need to learn in the context of solving the problems, because that's what we want as a sergeant. That's what I want. I want a problem-solving officer. I want an officer who doesn't have to call me every 5 minutes because they're at a new scene and they don't know what to do. I want them to be able to have a system in place to be able to do some creative problem solving, particularly when it comes to long-term community issues or things that arise that have been going on for quite a while, that the police department has thrown a number of resources at and we've never gotten anywhere with. So problem-based learning can facilitate self-discovery and experiential learning, learning in the context of experiences, and it causes people to think on higher orders, like they causes them to do some analysis and some evaluation, and that causes it to stick. And that's what I'm talking about. And particularly when it comes to use of force, because when we're talking about use of force, you need to know the policy and you need to know the case law. And you can't just read it and think that you know it. You have to dive in, do some analysis and some evaluation. So as a sergeant, those are the things that are kind of the most important things to me.
Well, I guess I'll pick up from there because I'm looking at it actually from the administrative point of view. And so from an administrative point of view, I look at it a little differently than the sergeant's point of view would look at it. I look at it as, what is it that's going to keep my department from being sued, or for my officers from getting into trouble? And so I look at it as the two things that are mostly going to get me or my department into trouble are going to be training and the fact of not following policies and procedures. And so looking at that, not only from my viewpoint as an administrator, but also from my legal viewpoint, because I've been an attorney for almost 30 years now too, is those are the things that the department is looking at. And how it gets there is the question. And so, I know you're looking at it and you're trying to show how you want the officers to be trained and how we want to get the right perspectives and get them problem solving and that. But, and I suppose I should leave this down to Roger or even Greg can comment on this, is from the administrative point of view, how are you going to keep me or my department or the city, never mind that, from being sued, making sure that our officers are trained the way they should be trained and that they are actually following the policies and procedures that they should be following. Because if we look at it right now, that's what's getting us into trouble right now, is if you see, how things are going in the country, there are a lot of examples of poor training and poor following of policies, and it's just, where do you start? Because of the simple fact that this has been ingrained in the police departments for years and years and years and years and years. How do you change that? So I throw that out to you. How do you do that?
I can actually sort of pick up on that. So as a trainer, specifically in defensive tactics, one of the things that after learning PBL and understanding it a little more, going back, it was no longer acceptable to just teach people how to stand there and strike or do a takedown. There had to be more to it. There had to be higher blooms, basically. So we started implementing emotional intelligence exercises while they were on the mats. We would do a drill and then they would have to write something along the lines of, what were you feeling? What do you think the other person was feeling on the other end of that? So just trying to start at the basic academy level, getting them to start thinking, what are your emotions in that moment? And are you controlling them? Because if you're not, you need to go back and think about how to control them and making sure that it's not just about doing a takedown on somebody, but why are you doing it? And what's everything behind the reason you're taking that person to the ground, and then making sure that you keep your emotions in check through all of that. So I think that starts at the basic academy level.
I suppose I can bring up another issue too, is would it even start even before that level, before you even get to the academy, on actually even the hiring process of new officers and that, considering right now we have a hard time finding officers. I mean, I know that our hiring is dropped dramatically over the course of the last few years, especially under the current circumstances, and people just don't want to be cops anymore. And the thing is, and the people who want to be cops, well, do we really know if they actually even should be cops? So how do you, I suppose the look at what should we be doing differently about even the hiring process, because I think that started or starts the whole issue that we've been having over the course. And so do we have to change our methods in regards to how we even hire people in the first place before we even get them to the academy and try to teach them the right way of doing things?
And I think, Paul, for me, a lot of this is messaging. A lot of this is the message that the police department sends out to the local community, sends out to the national community, the message that the police unions send out to the community. Whenever there's a press release, what are the words we use? We constantly use the terms law enforcement, but wait a minute. Policing does way more than law enforcement. We've known this in the research for decades. They do tons of things. Law enforcement got nothing to do with doing a radar trap, got nothing to do with helping people in minor disputes, nothing to do with that stuff at all. They're problem solvers. Let's be honest. Let's be truthful. What goes on here, and so we have to message that properly, And when you look at the messaging, you see things like the use of force messaging, the kinds of things that are said. You never get the message that use of force has to do with being mindful and aware of who you are. I mean, even the fact that Janelle is not only a tactics instructor, use of force instructor, but one of the best tactical police instructors in the country. I mean, you don't imagine how that takes place. And these are the kinds of voices that we need in our messaging. I'm so impressed when I see people like Janelle and Art Applin up in South Dakota, who are use of force firearms instructors who are doing this, and they don't have a problem adapting emotional intelligence to the training. They figure it out if we give them the chance and we message it properly. So that's how I think about it.
Yeah, so I would add a couple of things. One is that for me, the bottom line is that some uses of force are unavoidable. It's going to happen in our line of work. It's the direct and appropriate response to the actions of an arrestee or an assailant. It's going to happen. But it's important that we always remember that reasonable use of force is authorized by statute and case law. So you need to know what the statutes and the case law is. So all that is expected. But for me as a sergeant, the bottom line has always been that I want the people who work for me to be healthy and safe and to go home in one piece at the end of their shifts. So this means a couple of things for me. One, it means that use of force competence, that my officers are competent in the use of force. That means they know when to use it and how to use it. And two, they understand the effects that uses of force have on themselves and other officers, because it can take a toll. So, they have to know their agency's policy, use of force policy. They have to be competent in applying it under difficult, quickly evolving situations. They may not have all the facts, and human factors come into play, all the adrenaline and stress and narrowing of the vision and hearing and selective attention and perception and reaction time. All that stuff comes into play. But the second part of that is that, especially in a lethal force situation, it can negatively affect the folks that work for me. So I need to be concerned. And what I mean is that, we all know that the data tends to show that an officer who is involved in one officer involved shooting is more likely to be involved in another officer involved shooting, more likely than somebody who's never been involved in an officer involved shooting. And so that's something to be mindful of. And I have to be concerned about field trainers and how they're teaching the trainees use of force, and whether or not they're teaching self-awareness and self-regulation. What are their triggers? What are the things that are going to cause you to go off? Is somebody going to say something to you that's going to cause you to react in a way that's outside of the policy or the statute? So I have to be concerned with the psychological and emotional welfare of my officers. Clearly, lethal force incidents can lead to stress, both internal from the feelings of guilt or confusion or PTSD from the use of force, and then the external stresses from inevitable investigations and the aftermath of using lethal force. So, while all that stuff causes stress, we have to train that too, in addition to the use of force stuff. And I think that's what Janelle's talking about when she's talking about using or teaching the emotional intelligence stuff, teaching the self-regulation, the self-awareness stuff, the social awareness, the empathy stuff as part of the use of force. And if we're not doing that, then I don't think we're only teaching part of the story. And I don't think that's serving our officers well. So.
I actually get what you're saying as far as that goes, but looking at it from our perspective, or my perspective in the administration, and that is generally we've been around for a long time. And you come in and you talk to us about, self-awareness, and you talk to us about, problem-based learning and that. And, to me, it talks about, it seems like it's touchy-feely kind of stuff. And you know what? In a lot of cases, we can't do touchy-feely kind of stuff. And we're there to enforce the laws. We're there to make sure that, everybody is safe, and however we do it. So, how do I, first off, especially in the command staff level, teach them or the command staff to be accepting of that, because a lot of them have their own way of doing things. They, you know, are not emotionally intelligent, another issue that comes up. And so it's all new stuff to them, and and to them, people or cops especially like consistency and do not like change, needless to say. And so what do you tell, or how do you get the buy-in from the administration in the first place to buy into these new programs and that to because I agree. I mean, I've been doing this for quite some time now, and I agree that it is absolutely necessary, that has to be done. But I'm one of, you know, I don't know how many, and there's probably a much larger portion that are saying that this change is not needed. So I'm just throwing it out there as far as what do you think? How do we get people to actually understand that this kind of stuff is needed, and it's not just touchy-feely kind of stuff, and it's stuff that we need to change to make it so that we or do a better job, and we have more self-aware employees and officers, and that know how to use force appropriately, and that. And how do we do that? I'll throw that out to you guys.
Let me throw a perspective as a former beat cop and the criminologist trainer who looks at it from the outside looking in now and doing the research and also responding as a citizen to what's been happening, at least in the United States over the past year and a half, and the year before the pandemic as well. I mean, I hear these discussions from executives and decision makers saying, well, we don't really need the change, and that's just touchy-feely, and the academy is doing just fine the way it is now. But look, we've had 30 major chiefs in this country from major cities resign, you know, in frustration over the last 6 to 12 months. We've had, you know, 10,000 arrests, you know, in 100 different riots in cities across the country. The cities up until 6 months ago were burning, they were on fire. I mean, if there's any signal, we have a movement called Black Lives Matter and dozens of other movements, not just that one, but they're basically saying, let's defund the police. And there's been over, well, I think the numbers I saw were something of $1.7 billion in police funds in the top 20 cities in this country where they actually did defund the police. If that's, I mean, and I hear these discussions, we don't need to change. It's like they're sitting on a beach, you know, in their beach chairs, arguing about which chair to sit in while the tsunami is about to overwhelm them. You know, that's the absurdity of all. It's almost like we need some guts in police leadership to step up and say, you know, let's do this. I mean, I want to pose a question to Janelle. You know, I live in Denver, just south of Boulder, and a number of months ago, we had a tragic incident where we had this horrible shooting where a mass shooter went in with an assault rifle and killed 10 people. And the response from the Boulder police was truly outstanding. We had 3 cops there within minutes. They went in to make the arrest. The lead cop coming in, who was a PTO trainer, who actually was trained in our program. And so they did everything according to the book. They got in there. There was an exchange of gunfire. The shooter went down, and the lead officer lost his life tragically. Rest in peace. And so this is a tragic moment. This is a tragic event. But the truth of the matter is, those are very rare. In the 600 and 700,000 cops in this country, those kinds of events are extremely rare. The common event that people are complaining about aren't those. The common event is the police chase that goes wrong, or the bar fight that goes wrong, and the camera comes out. And in my thinking, and Janelle, tell me if you think I'm right on this, my thinking is we do need emotional intelligence in the tactical training. We do need problem-based learning training in it, but the cops actually don't get enough training. I think they get just enough to get through the gates. But a lot of cops that I know, they can't fight properly. And I don't mean fight as in get into a ring, but I'm saying they're not confident and competent in their tactics to be able to go in there, minimize it quickly, and get to it right away. I mean, am I on mark there, Janelle?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that a lot of programs, they expect their officers, I'll give it just a random number, 70 hours. That's what they've got to learn how to put hands on somebody and get them into handcuffs. And after 70 hours, we send
Not
them out
enough.
there and we say, okay, go do your job. And then, as a trainer, I am telling them, hey, maybe go to this school. This training school is available in your area. But after they leave the academy, I don't have any control over that. All I
Right.
can say is they got 70 hours with me. So yeah, that's absolutely lacking. And then there's absolutely no follow-up with defensive tactics training. Once they have their basics, a lot of agencies do not require annual training in defensive tactics.
Well,
So I'd like to, can I add something to that? Um, and that's that, again, from my perspective, I was an internal affairs investigator for a few years. So I had to investigate, I don't know how many uses of force. And I'm doing some work now that's causing me to go through YouTube videos of body cam video, dash cam video, cell phone video of different police officers. And what I'm starting to think is that many of the problems that people are complaining about with the defund the police movement aren't necessarily use of force issues. The underlying problem is a lost my temper issue. I don't know how to say it any other way, but if you go on to the internet and you start looking through videos, count as you go through videos, count how many times you see an officer who has essentially used force after being disrespected, a contempt of cop kind of episode, or uh, where uh, where you wouldn't necessarily consider it a rational or reasonable response to what was going on. Somebody said something. I can't tell you how many times I investigated uh, a police officer because somebody said something and then got slapped or hit by the police officer. And sometimes I was able to find evidence, and sometimes it wasn't a valid complaint, or I wasn't able to find evidence that it was a valid complaint. But to me, that's an emotional intelligence issue. That is self-awareness. That is knowing what your triggers are and um, what your level of tolerance for BS that you have to take from somebody is. And then it's a self-regulation issue. Can you, if you have gotten to that point where you're about to be triggered, refrain from uh, lashing out, either physically or verbally or whatever? Self-awareness and self-regulation are underlying key uh, emotional intelligence concepts and competencies. So just those alone, as a supervisor, that's what I'm concerned about. Then, we want community policing officers. So that's social awareness, that's empathy, that's relationship management. If you have officers who can't get along with each other on a team, that's relationship management stuff. So basically everything that we do is somehow related to emotional intelligence. And I would actually be surprised if now we have command staff members who are reluctant to address emotional intelligence in their agencies, although I don't think that there's still probably enough of it. So
Yeah.
I think that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, when Jerry Cleveland, who's also in our society, one of the founders of this movement, and I got involved with this in 1998 in Florida when we started this, and then did the national PTO program when we wrote that up, and had the 6 agencies pilot it across the country. And I can tell you that when Jerry and I started, one of the first elements we inserted into the PBL curriculum was emotional intelligence. And you should have heard the feedback we got in 1998, 2000, 2001, 2000. It was unbelievable. It was like, you can't introduce the concept of feelings, I mean, cops can't be doing that. I mean, they're going to be out there crying all the time. I mean, what do you want them to be carrying a little bear around all the time? I mean, these are the ridiculous comments you would get from this. And we would tell them, look, you just take a look at the police statistics on suicide, the police statistics on alcohol abuse, the police statistics on divorce, on drug abuse. I mean, it's over the top. How can you say that the suppression of emotions and not being competent with emotional intelligence is the thing? Well, of course, here we are 20 years later, and I think you're right, Roger. I think the tide has changed. I think we are now aware of that. What I'm really interested to know is, Melanie, you're sitting there as our board member, as a PBL certified trainer, but you're also not a police officer. You're a civilian, and you watch these events, these use of force events, and you're hearing this discussion now. What are your feelings like when you watch this on television? What do you think of policing?
So obviously a different perspective, and some of the feelings are, I know you, so I empathize with the cop that has not been trained, but I also hear my friends talking about a lot of the times, and they always get very upset about how police are treating minorities, for example, or different with, or families with low income families coming from, right? So my feelings associated with this is the inconsistencies of how cops are treating different individuals in society. So if I did something wrong, no matter if I'm from high society or I'm from this race or that race, I should be treated equally. That's the system that we set up. And I see that it's an hypocrisy all around, and everybody's pointing fingers. So I found right now that everybody's feelings are so hurt, and they're trying to blame everyone else in the community. So we're not seeing a way out of this, right? So we have a lot of negative feelings associated right away with that police enforcement. So how can we get away, or try to get away from those feelings and try to be different, or trying to inculcate in the community different type of feelings associated with the cops? Because right away, I come from a different country, a third world country, Mexico, that the cops have always been corrupt. You always run away from the cops, basically, in Mexico. So getting to understand the society for the last 10 years as well, and seeing in Canada the different type of training that they also have here, there's a lot of inconsistencies across North America on how cops are being trained. And Janelle pointed it out, 70 hours is not enough time. If I want to teach, I have to go and do like X amount of years, right? Or if I want to go and be a fireman, how many months of training do you get to? Right? So I believe that there's a lot of animosity within the community, and we need to find a way on how we can bridge that communication with the community, and how they don't get the habit of thinking cop is bad. We need to bring a different habit onto the table.
I would like to ask Janelle. So you described earlier this training where you're doing stuff on the mat, you're doing some mat work and stuff, and then you stop it to ask them about, what do you think this person feels, or what are you feeling in this moment? How do your trainees accept that, or do they just go along, or are they into it, or what's the response that you get to that kind of training?
With anything, like, you're obviously going to get a mixture of people, but over the years I've found that it's actually easier for them to write out those feelings. So while we do ask them in the moment, we do have writing assignments throughout, and a lot of times in the writing assignments I'll get a better reaction in that assignment than I do right on the mats, because they're trying to look tough in front of their friends and their peers. So they're not going to give a whole lot of feedback there. And I'm okay with that in the moment. I don't pressure them. But I do ask them to do writing assignments in the evenings, and ask them, for feelings on, okay, you were doing this today. You had to simulate this. what did that make you feel in the moment? And in those writing assignments, I'm finding that I actually get a little more feedback. So in the moments while they're talking, not a whole lot, but writing assignments actually helped. So
Yeah, it sounds like that journaling assignment that we have that we talk about, where you can document that kind of stuff, and then it's memorialized, so they can refer back to it. It's not lost in the ether, which is kind of nice. But it also sounds like it's a reflection or analysis of experiential learning that you're giving them,
yeah.
which I think, in my mind, would cause the learning to stick a little bit better. So
And not only that, but from Paul's perspective, you want accountability, Paul. You want to know in the training where these issues discussed. Now you have it written down. In the PTO, the field training program, journaling is a critical part of it. And some of the departments doing PTO don't read the journals, which we never ever recommended that. We've actually tried to go in and do damage control to correct that mistake in the field training programs, the PTO programs, where they don't do journaling and they don't monitor the journaling. Because the journaling is not only great for accountability, but it also, like Janelle says, you see things you don't see on the mat. If you don't get to see that now, 5 years from now, you end up saying to the cop, "What were you thinking?" Well, you should have known that as a trainer. You should have known that as a department, and you didn't have the mechanisms in place to answer those questions. When we now know what those mechanisms are, there's no excuse not to implement them in training now.
Will police academies be hesitant to implement some type of journaling, for example? Because, for example, as being in the education field, I keep a journal as well of different incidents with the students, etc. And or co-workers. And one of the things that it has brought to my attention is discouragement on journaling certain type of activities, because then we can become liable, for example. Are there any issues like that can possible? Some academies have issues in regards to journaling.
I can speak from my perspective here. I'm in California, and in the Bay Area, a regional academy that I worked closely with, I don't know if I should name them, but they started, they do a student portfolio. So the students are required to do a portfolio of their learning throughout the academy, and that's their proof of what they've gotten from it. And one of their assignments is journaling daily, making a daily journal entry. And so, no, I don't think that that's necessarily a big problem. And from what I learned, I taught report writing at that academy. So my experience was that the students didn't mind it. Sometimes it's a chore, but sometimes, they got to kind of vent or document some of the stuff that they learned. For me, in the academy, it's all about learning. So it's a learning journal. It's documenting the things that you learned, and not just learning about the topics, but also things that you learned about yourself. What causes you stress? What's your tolerance level for, physical activity, or being yelled at by the DI, or whatever, but you can document that stuff. And you not only learn about report writing and legal authority and vehicle stops, but you learn about yourself. And so that's
one of the things I think that actually happens with the journals, and that, though, in regards to from a legal perspective and stuff, and especially administration looks at it as, can that be used against the officers at a later time when they've written down this stuff in their journals that are introspective and their self-awareness and problems that they may be encountering and all this, and now that journal is potentially out there, and is it discoverable? Is it something that can be used against the department at a later time, also because of the fact that as you were saying, that the trainers and that are supposed to be looking at these journals and stuff like that, and if they didn't see that this person had issues in that and they allowed them to continue on, and then something happens. So I want to throw that out as far as, what legal ramifications, I mean, speaking from my attorney hat on, what legal ramifications could this have for police department as well as the individual officers themselves?
Well, what are the ramifications right now? I mean, we don't have journaling in most academies, and look at the catastrophe we're facing today. We have a huge transformation going on right now because those things are not being done, and they are liable. And now we're talking about defunding the police, getting rid of cops. I mean, the time has passed to do this. And furthermore, I've heard, I mean, from a legal perspective, I've heard this said before. In fact, one department in Canada that used the journaling, the trainee made some comment about the trainer. He thought it was racist. It got out there. The deputy chief of the department says, "Oh, that's terrible. And so let's get rid of all journaling," as opposed to saying the exact opposite, which was, "Oh, we just made a discovery here about a racist attitude that we need to deal with it right now." I mean, my sense of it is the court that looks at this case and says, this was identified as a racial issue, and these were the steps taken by the department to deal with that, shows the very kind of transparency that the community wants out of their police. That's the messaging. The journaling provides the very messaging of transparency that groups like Black Lives Matter actually want. Therein lies our salvation. We shouldn't run away from it.
Very excellent point.
I think you muted there, Malena.
There you go. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that was an excellent point to end this podcast. Wow. We just went through one question from the few ones that we got submitted. So I look forward to maybe dig deeper in the next podcast, maybe a phase 2 in the use of force. Currently, I think we believe that it's super important to understand the importance of emotional intelligence in training, in the use of police force as well. And journaling is that transparency that the community, as a community member, that can provide a very clear understanding of what happened, and also understand the different points of view in a situation, right? We always get the media side of things with the audience, but the cops side of things, sometimes it never gets disseminated because of rules or regulations, etc. So thank you for listening to our podcast. We hope we instigated conversation, new ideas, or new perspectives in your current role in the community as a police officer, as an educator, or in the government as well. We would like to hear from you your ideas or your questions you may have. Please contact us via social media or send us an email to info@pspbl.org. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you for listening to us.
Thank you.